Hey everyone, thank you for joining. I'm Caroline Goodman, CEO of FemiClear. And FemiClear is a brand that deals with vaginal health issues. We deal with conditions that most people don't want to get, but if you have them, you certainly want them taken care of or addressed as well as possible. And that's what we try to do. So we deal with things like yeast infection, vaginal itch, and genital herpes. And genital herpes is really what we're here to talk about today. And we have several awesome guests that are willing to talk with us as herpes advocates and experts. And I want to introduce them now. So there is Amber Spratt-Jones, who is co-founder of Herpes Could Never. She's a certified life coach, and her mission is to end the herpes stigma and help people heal. There's Christopher Pickerington, I'm sorry, I messed that name up, health and fitness content creator turned HSV advocate after going through his own diagnosis journey and saw how many people are suffering in silence. Suze Elzbieta, she's a herpes advocate and central guide whose desire is to help people reconnect with their confidence and inner baddie. And then we also have Joel Bauman, who hasn't joined us yet, but he is known as King Bao. He's a professional mixed martial artist, recording artist, producer, and social entrepreneur. So thank you guys all for being here. We really appreciate it. And I'm going to give a little bit of background on herpes for people who don't know. Herpes affects way more people than most people assume. People think of it as kind of a rare condition, and it's not. It's incredibly common. 1 in 5 women has it, and 1 in 8 men has it. So, and this is genital herpes. So if you look at oral herpes, which is part of the discussion we're going to have tonight, really it's upwards of 80% of people have HSV1 oral herpes virus in their bodies. And as we all know, herpes is not curable. Once you have the virus, it stays in your body for life. But there are ways of managing it and having it not be as big of a hindrance on your life as a lot of people might think. So the reality is there's a lot of stigma associated with the word herpes. It's a hot button issue, and we're going to get into why and what people think about it. We know that a lot of people with herpes have a lot of mental health or emotional issues with it. So we want to get these people on this call that have been talking about it and really trying to make it the normalized condition that it is and get their opinion. So first, I'm going to start with the video that started the idea for this conversation. And I want to share that with you guys.
The fight game, and I put in 30 all-nighters before that fight. I had herpes before that fight, 2 outbreaks in the span of a week. I'm here, I'm healthy, let's go, whatever, doesn't matter. Last fight, I was tired, I was exhausted. I'm about to launch this NFT that's gonna change the fight game. And I put in 30 all-nighters before that fight. I had herpes before that fight, 2 outbreaks in the span of a week. I'm here, I'm healthy, let's go, whatever, doesn't matter. Last fight.
Okay, let me end the share. Okay, so that was obviously quite a provocative statement that you made, Joel. Thanks for joining. Tell us why you said that. At the end of a fight, how did you decide to share that bit of information?
Because there was millions of people watching, or were going to be millions of people watching.
Okay, and what were you hoping or expecting the reaction of the public to be?
Everything that it was.
Okay, say more about that. Say more about what you heard as you experienced the aftermath, and lots of people talking, to you about you. I mean, I think you were covered by Jimmy Kimmel, TMZ, Chris Brown, Fox News, New York Post. I mean, you were covered in a lot of places. Do you think it was because you mentioned herpes?
Of course.
Is that why you said it?
Humans are predictable.
Okay. And what were you hoping the impression would be?
A conversation.
All right. We'll start that conversation. What do you want to say about having herpes?
I mean, I think it's nothing to me because wrestlers and combat athletes definitely suffer from it. They don't necessarily look at it like a sexually transmitted disease. They look at it like, oh, this is just another thing that we have to deal with because of the sport that we play. So it's, to me, it's not the thing that people make it. And it's never been. And I've always been able to communicate that with whoever I've needed to communicate that with, and they understand. So now it's going to be fun to get the world to understand why it's not a big deal.
There was some back and forth communication between you and a couple of our guests. Suze, tell us, what your reaction was when you saw or heard Joel's comments.
Yeah, so I mean, my initial reaction was one of like celebration, and still is in a way. I mean, I was really excited to see someone in a public setting, especially in, like a professional athlete status. We rarely get people who are in athletics and any kind of arts, and celebrity of any capacity stating that they have herpes as if it's just an everyday thing. And we often wish people would, because it really would help, eradicate the stigma, to know that a lot of the people we watch on TV, we listen to in podcasts, we follow on social media as influencers, we watch on movies, like so many of those people have herpes, it's such a common virus. So I thought it was great. I was going to make a video like celebrating and applauding Joel. And again, I still commend him for saying that and starting a conversation. I think for me, what, I ended up making sort of a commentary on and shedding light on was having genital herpes myself. I often talk about the stigma that exists between oral and genital herpes and how the location really changes our cultural perception of things. And there was just a tweet that alluded to, or that Joel made, that said, at least it's not on my genitals, if that's how I'll characterize it. And I think that was just like what I called attention to, because to me, that felt like it then suddenly stigmatized the conversation. So Joel and I had some back and forth about that directly, which I'm sure we can get more into. I will say that I've definitely come to see since then just how sensational the media was and the assumptions they made, and what a huge part of the story that actually is too. So yeah.
Yeah, well, you know what, I think I'm glad, in a way, Joel sort of had predicted what the reaction was going to be of the media, and indeed it was, and it led to this conversation. It led to you all getting together and us having this talk. Christopher, you made a very popular video on TikTok that talks about the location of your herpes outbreak, and say more about what, that thing went viral like crazy. And why don't you give everybody a summary of kind of what you mean by that?
Well, we have two kinds of herpes in society, and one of them is not really called herpes. One of them is just called cold sores. And it appears that people have labeled what I have, which is genital herpes, with just the label of herpes, and anything up here isn't really considered that. And it doesn't really get the same amount of disclosure or judgment. And the video that I made was basically saying how guy out there with a cold sore, or girl out there with a cold sore, or who experiences cold sores in the past, goes down on someone through oral sex, gives them genital HSV1, or just transfers from oral down to their genitals. That person now feels just as judged, just as stigmatized as I do with my typically sexual to sexual herpes. But yet they probably weren't disclosed to. And the person who had the cold sore or a history of cold sores may not have even known it was herpes, may not even known it could have been passed. So
Yeah.
just the giant disconnect between the way it's seen and the way it's portrayed.
Yeah, I think it's not well known by people who don't have either kind of herpes, maybe even some people that do have oral herpes, that 30% of the cases now are actually oral HSV1 creating genital herpes based on, oral sex. And so I think that's a big, potential for education here. I hope, that's a really common form of genital herpes is HSV1. So genital herpes can be either virus, and the viruses are not that different. So Amber, I know that you also communicated back and forth, or your partner Shayna, the herpes goddess, communicated a little bit back and forth with Joel, and you mentioned something about what this may be doing to the Black community. Say more about that.
Okay, thank you for that. So sure. So yeah, like you mentioned, herpes can never. So we are at war with the herpes stigma, and so our community feels comfortable being open about their status and proud of their sexuality. I just wanted to say that that's our mission. And you mentioned Shayna, the founder of Herpes Can Never, and I wanted to mention that as well. But specifically speaking to the Black community, I think where Shayna and I shared disappointment, where we shared excitement initially, is that here's this Black man. What Sue said, spot on, right? Here's somebody who's in a celebrity position, in a position with eyes on them, in a sport that's so filled with masculine energy, saying, look, I have herpes. It's nothing. I had an outbreak. I knew why I had my outbreak, because I was experiencing lack of sleep and my immune system was low. Like, you could tell, obviously educated about their diagnosis, and really brought that unapologetic herpes could never energy, right? So we were celebrating that. We were in the comments, we were linking, we were trying to get him on our platform ASAP, because here we are. And so to see a Black person who, as Black people in America, bottom line is we're already born into so many stigmas, just being Black, just being born. And so that's a struggle, or that's a conversation that, you have to be Black to really relate to. And so to have someone and be able to relate to, okay, we have herpes, which is something that is very common, but still, when you can relate to a person who's been diagnosed with herpes, when I can look at Chris, and when I can look at Suze, and when I can look at people and say, we've been diagnosed, we all know what that moment feels like, right? We've had that diagnosis moment. And so to know that he's experienced that, that's relatability. But to also know that here's a Black man, that's a different level of relatability. And so, I saw brokenness and pain, like that's what that tweet was for me, was the weight of the stigma and the justifiable in a way, because again, that's what we're trying to do, end this terrible stigma. And I heard what he said when he spoke, Joel, at the beginning, saying how ridiculous the stigma is, but unfortunately he stigmatized part of our community, and that's the beef that I have with them, right? So as a Black man, I celebrate and support him, and I'm never going to tear him down on any platform, regardless if I disagree with some of his ways or how he goes about certain things. But it's like, okay, we have to do better, and we have to be the change that we want to see and have these conversations. And that's what I'm hoping we can do more of, and not be so like, oh, I did this for that. No, we just got to do it to genuinely help our people, because, we all need help in the herpes community. It's about healing, but we can also say in the Black community, we need a different type of help. And that's what I hope to continue to do with these conversations.
Yeah, yeah. Joel, do you want to comment on that?
Yes, absolutely. What my question would be, What if I don't believe I'm a color? You know, there was a comment, you know, the black community, and there's a lot of identity going on. What if I don't identify as any of that? What if I simply identify as I am? What if I simply identify that I don't have herpes? But what if I just simply identify that I am? What if it all comes back to that identification? And another point was made of, you know, I said this and did this, and all to get to her saying, so we can have a conversation about it. Let me ask you this. Are we having a conversation now? Yes. And we get to educate the world on something that's really not a big deal. So we won. I believe that fear and insecurity and shame, those are the real pandemics to me. And comedy is the highest form of enlightenment. You have to trigger people. And when you trigger people, you can actually have a conversation as to, wait a minute, why do you think that's a big deal? That's stupid. That doesn't make any sense. Why do you think that's a big deal? We can educate. So I think in response to everything that she is saying, I feel like my intention has perfectly played out. We get to have this conversation now in front of the world, and we get to address an issue that is causing people shame and making them feel insecure. And that is the real issue to me.
You're completely right. And I would ask, everybody on this panel, think back to when you first learned that you had herpes and how you felt. I think everybody does go through that, like, reflection in the mirror. How does this make me feel? And we've done a lot of consumer research of people who have herpes, and we know the words we've heard of how people felt, and none of them are mild. They're all extreme in terms of shame and, feeling dirty and feeling, some people even say suicidal. And I mean, they're very extreme feelings that people get when they're first diagnosed. Probably not everyone on the, that's ever been diagnosed, but most. And so I guess I'd like to open it up. Christopher, Amber, Suze, tell us, how did you feel when you first got diagnosed, and what's your pathway been like? You guys are all enlightened now. You're all talking about it. You're all out there very publicly trying to help deal with this thing that Joel's talking about, the shame and what many people carry for years and years after diagnosis. You guys are much more evolved in your journey, but talk a little bit, let's hear from Suze first, and just tell us, how has your, kind of journey been from diagnosis to where you are now?
Yeah, so I mean, I do really relate to the concept that diagnosis can be incredibly heavy. I grew up around family members and relatives and friends who got cold sores, and, we called them cold sores. It wasn't a big deal. And of course, there's some stigma attached to that as well. People endure bullying. It's visible, like there's a whole layer to that. And I always had an awareness of genital herpes, but I always saw it as something different as well. Even myself, I was like, that's not the same. Cold sores are normal, you get it through innocent means, like herpes is an STD, right? And I think I had a sense that that cold sores were a virus that stays forever too, but the word herpes is just always associated with genital herpes. And, when I was diagnosed, it was a really difficult, dark time for me. I had passively suicidal thoughts about, life is going to be terrible from here on in. All the stigma that I had learned culturally and societally about genital herpes was everything I was feeling the weight of when I got diagnosed. And I remember the nurse in the clinic when I was breaking down over it was like, you know, why are you crying? It's fine. It's not a big deal. So many people have it. You know, she handed me a pamphlet. I was so offended at the time because I felt like she was minimizing, you know, my experience. But you know, that's something that I see every day in the community, and I hear from so many people constantly who are in that same dark place and do manage to pull themselves out of it more often than not, and overcome the shame and stigma and learn about it, and you know, realize that there's this cultural perception that is the majority of the issue, because the actual virus really barely has a bearing on our lives and our physicality and our well-being. And I think just to quickly touch on, you know, what Joel was saying, I think to me at the time of a diagnosis, a tweet like that would have been devastating, because it would have made me feel immediately alienated from, you know, a consensus that herpes was great, that herpes was normal and common and acceptable and all good. And this fighter that people look up to, or that I might look up to, has it. And I'd be like, that's amazing, you know? And it wouldn't actually matter where, but words do carry weight, and there's accountability behind words. And I think we all know how much we trigger people with our content, our statements, our interviews, everything. But I just think a phrase like that would have added to that devastation when I was in that vulnerable state, and very much could for people in that state right now, because they'd suddenly feel, well, oh shoot, this public disclosure and statement that herpes is normal and okay doesn't apply to me because I have it genitally. When it does, because it really is the same virus, regardless of location. And I know Joel believes that. I've watched some of his content. I know he feels that it is common. We shouldn't be defined by it. You know, it doesn't matter where it is. We're all the same. And that's the message I try to get out in my content all the time, is whether it's oral or genital, it's the same. But it is undeniable, to circle back, that it's a very heavy diagnosis for a lot of people because of that stigma. So, I mean, we don't react the same way when we get oral herpes. For the most part, you know, it's just like, I have a cold sore.
Yeah, it's an aggravation, but maybe not, you know, not the same sort of life-changing, you know, devastation that people, I think, get with genital herpes. Although, you know, Amber, I think you were about to say something. Chime in with your experience.
To answer the question and pass it to Chris or Joel to tag back in, but I know I want Chris to answer this as well, to hear from a male perspective. I think it's important, but a few things just immediately, right? That text would have, or that tweet would have, did do damage, right? And so I understand, yes, here we are having this conversation. Yes, the plan worked, but to what cost, right? Like, nobody in the herpes community is collateral damage to me, right? I don't care if, only a certain amount of people had to be devastated, but look where we are, look at the progress that we've made. I just don't believe, you know, going about doing things in that way. And I just feel like there's other ways to educate, because I don't feel like there was anything educational about that tweet. So I wanted to address that. Yes, I want to educate. Yes, I'm glad you're here to educate. I do feel like you have things and value to add to this conversation again, but I stood up in service to this community, and we had so many members of our community who shared your content to us, who DM'd us, people who weren't even herpes positive. My dad DM'd me, like, look what this MMA fighter did. And, you know, initially, and then to see that tweet, it's just like, okay, here we are with this conversation, but moving on. And I hear you not wanting to identify as Black or any color or anything, but it's like, you don't have to identify yourself as Black for everyone else to identify you as Black. And because you've been identified as Black by others, that has an effect on who you are, whether you want to be aware of that or not, no matter it has shaped you in a way. No, I can understand you could have grown and it shaped you to who you are right now. So I'm not even necessarily saying that's negative, but I am saying that I respect your decision not to be identified as anything. However, but the way that the world exists, you have been identified as Black by pretty much everybody else. And so that's just is what it is. So to move into the fact that, yes, when you get diagnosed with herpes, I received my diagnosis over the phone. I didn't even have any symptoms, right? I went to the doctor after I got done sleeping with somebody irresponsibly and was expecting a negative STD result. What part of the game is that, right? But here I was still in my delusion, expecting a negative test result because I didn't have any outbreaks anywhere. And I got a call saying that I had HSV2 and she called it genital herpes at the time. Come to find out now, being diagnosed since 2018, I'm asymptomatic. I don't even have outbreaks. There is a huge part of the herpes community who doesn't even have outbreaks. And that's an entirely different population to deal with. And stigmatizing, people in the asymptomatic community stigmatize those who actually have outbreaks. Well, at least I don't have outbreaks. And I'm at their necks too, because I'm like, look, we're not stigmatizing anybody. We're not going to break the herpes stigma, stigmatizing any other part of the community. And though we have outsiders, people who don't have herpes, who stigmatize our community, like the reality is most people have herpes. So most people stigmatizing our community is us. How do we break the stigma if we stigmatize portions of our own community? That's where, and we can't stigmatize nobody else. Well, I have HSV, at least I don't have HIV. Absolutely not. We don't stigmatize anybody for anything. And that's the message we promote at Herpes Can Never. So that's why I was so taken aback by the tweet. And then just the, this is a part of my plan. And this is everybody is sheep and doing whatever I want. That whole approach, I'm just like, yeah, I guess you are winning, but at what cost? And so that's
Amber, if you could go say, because I know Joel has tweeted a lot and we only showed the video clip of him after the fight. Can you specify the tweet that kind of created this reaction for you?
Yeah, the particularly one where he said, at least I don't have it on my D. Referring to HSV, referring to his outbreaks. And because, I did go back and do some scrolling on his page and seeing his oral outbreaks. And again, understand that he feels the same way about the stigma, as maybe pieces of the same way as about each of us on this platform right here, right now. But it's just the way it was gone about. Again, that's why we're having this conversation. So that's my 2 cents. I want to pass it over to Chris.
Great. And I really do want to hear from Christopher, because from some of our research, we have seen, it seems like there is a little bit of a difference in generalizing terribly here, but the female experience versus the male experience. So Christopher, tell us, kind of thinking back to your initial diagnosis to where you are now, how has that gone for you?
How personal would you like to get?
Personal, let's do it.
Okay, I didn't have much of a sex life before I got it. I probably had sex 13 times total in my life before I got herpes. That's not 13 partners, that's just 13 times. And I am close to 30 now, but that's okay. And I also struggled with erectile dysfunction for most of my life. So that was also fun to explain before I got the herpes. And then post-diagnosis, I pretty much had to accept both of these things and kind of, if I didn't have to explain one thing, now I have to explain 2 things. And of course I felt like ashamed and shunned and like stigmatized. And I didn't even necessarily think of this as herpes. But what I had is just herpes. And essentially I self-diagnosed and kind of was like, oh, why did this happen to me? Of course it would happen to me, sort of thing. And then went to the doctor and basically got diagnosed and said, hey, I think I have herpes, can we check? And then when I got my positive diagnosis, it was just sort of like, oh, figures that I was right about this. And for like a few months, I was spiraling down thinking the first person I sleep with is going to get it, or like, why would someone take the risk, or just stuff like that. Or I was going to have a rough time, because obviously your first outbreak for anyone watching is probably your worst. And you probably think it's going to go on for like 3 or 4 weeks. Mine was like a month-long outbreak. And then I had an outbreak like a week after. And just for everyone out there too, I've had like 18 outbreaks. Right now I actually have an outbreak, just so you guys want to know as well. So we're at 18 now in about like 16 months. But it's okay. It's okay, because now we've used this as like a catalyst for change, for self-improvement, for a way to get myself back on track, like physically and mentally, because honestly, like, you don't really have a choice other than to sort of be like, hey, what can I change that's within my control? How can I see this as like a positive thing, or at least something that I'm not going to let derail me completely? And for everyone out there who's like struggling, like, it's okay. But at some point you sort of have to be like, what can I do to make it so that I'm not struggling as much in the future? And here we are.
Yeah. Yeah, no, thank you for that. And Joel, I want to hear about whether you had, any of these kind of feelings when you first had your first cold sore or were diagnosed with that, and how you're reacting to how you're hearing everybody's experience having been diagnosed with genital herpes. What's your reaction? I mean, tell us first about your experience, then tell us how all this commentary kind of sits with you.
So there's a whole other perspective that's not necessarily being addressed, in my opinion. And that is, what about all the kids like me who didn't really even know what they got when they got it? Like, I didn't get a diagnosis from a doctor. I had to learn, oh man, this is what it is. You know what I mean? Like, as I was wrestling, you know what I mean? Like, there's so many kids in wrestling that like get it, and then they don't know like, now they got to explain the rest of their life that they are dealing
Oh, you're breaking up a little bit.
thing. Whoever.
Joel, we're having a hard time hearing you right now.
Getting judged, all those big
It's going to resolve.
deal, you make over shame. How many people I've herpes and how
Okay, I think the technical issues, but yeah, I mean, based on your experience and the people that you've talked to, since you guys have all got big followings, Amber, does this come up much in Herpes Could Never? The difference between oral herpes and genital herpes.
Yes, address. I hope he can watch the replay of this and get back on here. But that is another reason why we're trying to break the stigma. So many people, so many kids have herpes that did not get herpes sexually, that did not get herpes like herp. That's why we want to break the stigma, to normalize it. And so it won't be like this. So how do I have to explain it? It's herpes, it's chicken pox, it's my hair is brown, my eyes are brown. Like, it's just something that's matter of fact. That's the how we're doing the work that we're doing. So yes, I can understand what he's saying. So he's like, to the kids like me who didn't get it sexually, what would you say? Say the same thing. Use your platform to be like, look, I'm a UFC fighter. I didn't get it sexually. That's what I would do. Like, be the change you want to see. If you didn't see that, become that. And so that would be my advice to him, because it is very, there's herpetic Whitlow.
Isn't that what I've done?
No. In a way you did it, but then you I feel like you reneged when you put that tweet out. Like, and there's nothing wrong with making a misstep. But see, you might not view it as a misstep because, again, it's part of your strategy, but there's nothing wrong with saying, I can understand how that tweet might have made a lot of people feel some type of way. There's nothing wrong with acknowledgement. I don't believe.
Hold up. I did though. Whoa. I did though. I mean, here's what I think you're missing, Amber, because we have the same mission. We have the exact same mission. Everything that you stand for, I stand for. Everything that you are about, I'm about. I'm about healing. I'm about consciously shifting this planet into not having to have what I feel are stupid conversations like this, educating on something that everybody has. How is there a stigma around something that 90% or however much percent of the world has? Majority of the planet has this thing. There shouldn't be a conversation about this anymore. And only if it's educational and in a way of, you don't know this? Like, you don't know this? In some way, shame can be a good thing. Shame taught me how to rise up out of shame. I used to feel shame all the time. I used to not like myself. I had to do a lot of work on this and a lot of work on this to get right. A lot of work. And
Okay, so that's
sometimes people forget. And sometimes you have to be that example. Meaning I'm not fazed by anything. I just had the world laugh at me for something that I knew that they would. And I'm open to talking about with confidence because it's not me. I'm
So
not
why
my
did-
diagnosis. That's
why-
the point.
so how would you say, how did you make that mind shift? How did you get yourself out of, and this is really for anybody, how did you get yourself out of the feelings of shame into the kind of empowered state you're in now?
I hated myself and I had to learn how to love myself unconditionally.
Any
You
tips?
have to get over fear. Get over fear. Live your dream fearlessly. Live and learn how to love yourself in everything that you do. That's the point. I can go out on a public platform and do what other people would consider themselves being embarrassed. And now we get to have this conversation. I mean, everybody's talking about, you just used your platform to do this and you used herpes. And it's like, wait a minute, there's herpes influencers on this call. Everybody here has gone viral for at least one of the conversations, correct? This is how we do it. This is how we do it. And we do it fearlessly, and we do it confidently, and we do it, and we be an example of love for other people. May I be an example of possibilities. That's all I've ever wanted to be.
I think that's beautiful. And I think that is what everybody on this call is trying to do with their own platforms. As the FemiClear brand, we want to try to help make the journey from kind of initial diagnosis or whatever the feelings of shame are that you have in that state to being as comfortable as you can and fully self-accepting the reality that you're going to live with herpes and you're going to manage it. And it's just like everybody's got something. But any suggestions, Christopher, Susanna, Amber, on what's a way to shorten that path? How do we get from, that initial shock? Christopher, you are super vulnerable, telling us, kind of things that are personal. How do you get that confidence to be that vulnerable?
So for me personally, when it came down to like getting over the stigma, it really came down to sort of questioning things. Like, you almost have to just stop and think like, okay, where did the stigma come from? What is it about? Why do I feel this way? Do I have to feel this way? Instead of just taking whatever society or whatever media has told you about. Because to like just touch on something that I was doing when I looked at the Joel stuff, there was a lot of interviews and people's reactions to what Joel said. And like the amount of misinformation, the amount of closed-minded individuals that were reacting and being like, too much information, or why would you say this? Or that's so crazy. And I actually made a little point in my head earlier. If I was an MMA fighter with genital herpes and Joel has oral herpes, fighters are more likely to contract oral herpes from Joel during a fight than they'd be to contract genital herpes from me, simply because of the clothing I would wear during the fight and the fact that if Joel is facially close to someone else's face, similar to how Matt herpes is involved, they're more likely to get it from him. But there's been interviews of guys like these joking guys reacting, being like, they let him fight? Oh no, we need to call the UFC and tell him, but don't fight him, or like ban him. And like, yeah, like it was it's shocking to see the reaction of like society and the media. And to touch on the media as well, like I didn't know a lot about this whole situation. I was kind of like not touching on it when people were sending me the videos, because I just was like, what is this even about? Like, what's the big deal here? He just said he has herpes. Okay, now what? And the fact that this was on Jimmy Kimmel is kind of a joke. And like, it took me a long time to sort of figure out what this whole situation is about. But honestly, like, it it really sort of exposes the fact that, why are we talking about this in just the extremity, or just like, this has been blown out, like, oh my God, this guy said he has herpes. Like, the fact that that is what we're currently at as a society is a shame.
No, to me, it is shocking how this is probably one of the most closeted conditions that still exists. I mean, I think HIV, mental illness, these are other conditions that used to be much more stigmatized, and they've done, we've come a long way in normalizing those conditions. And it's just crazy that we are still so, the mass of people really don't know how kind of common it is. They don't know really what it means to manage it, what it means, what people experience with it. So I wish that we were where Joel, thinks we should be in terms of saying, why are we still talking about it? We haven't even begun to start talking about it, I think. And it's just going to take a lot more conversations, because, everybody on this call is very well educated and very evolved in their way of thinking, and doing your part, more than your part, to help educate. But Susanna, any comments from you on how to, kind of get your confidence back, or release yourself from the shame that you felt in the beginning?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I want to quickly touch on is like, I agree, and also saw the wrath of the media in response to this, in response to Joel. And I think we've all felt it in varying degrees from building our platforms and talking about this. And one way that, I actually gained a lot of confidence around this was by declaring it publicly, because, it first started with telling friends and family. Like, when I first got it, I remember thinking, like, besides the partner I got it from and future partners, I'm never going to tell anybody, and I had a very, painful situation around it, because I got it from a partner who I later discovered, had likely lied to me about his status. He had been cheating on me for our entire relationship. So a lot of the stuff I have a gripe with and try to point out to people is that, everybody who might have gotten it orally and as children or as teenagers or as adults in innocent ways, it's totally valid. But we aren't we're not morally corrupt for getting it genitally just because we had sex, just because we were intimate, just because, whatever it may be, because, even genital herpes, you can still get it non-sexually. It's skin to skin contact, right? So I always try to point out that, it's about equalizing both. And it's not about shaming one or the other, or shaming how anybody got it. Because to me, no matter how responsible we think we can be, like, if I had vetted my partner, had him get tested, had him show me his results, herpes wouldn't have been on there, and we wouldn't have even known better, because it isn't in routine STI screenings. You have to know to request it. So there's so many things working against us. And I find it so ironic that, like, the medical community understands that it's not a big deal, because they don't screen us for it. They don't typically worry about it unless you develop symptoms, and then they'll diagnose you so that you can, like, treat it if you need to or want to, or if it's disrupting your life. But culturally, it has such a weight, because, like, I always think about, like, herpes has been around for millions of years. It's one of the oldest viruses. Every generation, we, like, re-stigmatize it in different ways. I remember looking into kind of the history of it, and in the 80s, Times Magazine had this, like, full front page story about herpes being the new scarlet letter, and it was like bloody red lettering across the front cover. And it was like how herpes is the consequence of the sexual revolution. So it's so tied to just demonizing sex, period. And so a little bit of a tangent there, but I'll say that, like, gaining confidence around it is so important to me because I was practicing and exploring sensuality before I got my herpes diagnosis. And when I got diagnosed, my self-worth plummeted. And, sensuality is just a connection to that like innate sexual, sensual expression, that confidence, that ability to celebrate yourself and adore yourself and recognize your worth. And so the herpes diagnosis really just inspired me to move even deeper into that and love myself harder and celebrate myself more and express myself even more. So it was a lot of that practice and disclosing to friends and family, seeing that they were accepting and understanding. And then not everybody has to do this, absolutely not. But disclosing in a public setting can be freeing because you take the action to normalize it. And I know Joel is saying, and I understand, like, we want this to be a reality where we don't even need to talk about it. It's a moot point. We all have it. Most of us have it. It's not a big deal. But the reality is, it is severely stigmatized. We see that from the media's reaction to his public statement. And like Christopher pointed out, like how incredibly uneducated and misinformed people are wanting to ban fighters for having it when there's a literal type named for athletes, like mat herpes, like Christopher mentioned, or herpes gladiatorium is caused by HSV1 and is the same thing as oral herpes, shows up genitally. It has its own designation because it's so common among wrestlers. So yeah, I applaud him for pointing it out and talking about it and putting it out there. And I believe he has good intentions, but he did, when you mentioned, Joel, like being the love you want to see and like acting out of love, the tweet wasn't a loving thing to do or say, and that's all right. Like Amber said, we can just say, maybe that was a misstep. Maybe I alienated some people or hurt some people with that. I don't think the onus is on people to be like, I felt hurt by that tweet. That's my issue to deal with. I think there's responsibility behind your words and what you said, and how you might have hurt a subsect of people who have herpes.
I take full responsibility for what I said. I take full, let me say it again, 1 second. I take full responsibility for what I said. The reason I say things is to trigger people, to get attention. It's what all comedians do. It's why cancel culture is coming after comedians, because they don't want people to have these conversations. That's what matters. I have people that are despising me on one side and then real close people to me calling me a genius on the other. I have people in the herpes community still reaching out to me saying, I see your intentions, keep going. It's making more sense. Everybody wanted to demonize. Everybody was laughing before I dropped all my videos. And now everybody got all the information and they go, wow, he's really well thought out. It looks like everybody just has to have more information. And that's what this whole discussion is. Mat herpes. Think about all the kids that get mat herpes every year that got to sit here and feel some type of way. I just did it for those kids because it's not a big deal. Did I do it? And if we're talking about all herpes, that means we did it for everybody. That's the point. So hopefully you can feel my heart and you can feel my intention. And Suzanne, just so you know, we're all good on socials. I got you back. I'm going to follow you.
I'm weak. I'm sorry. I'm so weak. Hold on. Joe, because this
You too, Amber. You too, Amber.
He was strong. He can't wait. Joe can't wait to block somebody. Hold on. If you're gonna be able to talk it, you gotta walk it out. So okay,
I just can't do the back and forth. I just can't do back and forth.
Okay, well,
we got to do this. We got to do this.
Okay. Can we do this? Can we? Because to answer your point, Joel, again, you're right. I think we can all agree. Why are we having this conversation? But we have to, because there hasn't been intentional efforts put around normalizing these type of conversations. There haven't been before now. There haven't been people who are stepping up and saying, hey, I have herpes, let's talk about it. So now that we're here, let's make this a regular thing to let's figure out how to show up best and to really break the stigma, because That's exactly why Herpes Can Never was started. We were never going to stop until the stigma was broken. So here is a giant step towards breaking the stigma. But to get to Carolyn's point and to hand the mic back over, I want to say this: if you're looking to break the herpes stigma, what helped me was two things. One was forgiving myself. I had so much shame because I got mine sexually. I had so much shame about having it. Oh, Amber, how did you get it? You weren't supposed, how did this happen to you? I had to deal with my own shame and guilt and embarrassment, and I had to forgive myself for that. And that was a journey. So forgive yourself, number one. And number two, what helped me is to put into perspective that the day I got herpes was not the day that I always thought that no one was going to love me. No one was going to want to marry me. No one was going to do this, or that my confidence, I realized how insecure I was. Herpes did not do all of that. All of that existed prior to my herpes. There was just so many things I had to deal with, so many things I had to address with myself, and that healing, working on the other things, looking at herpes like, okay, let me deal with the virus. How does it affect my body? Where do I have it on my body? What do I need to change? What do I need to work on? Okay, how's the virus affect me? Dealing with the stigma. Okay, how does this made up thing, this made up social thing that doesn't even exist, you can't feel it, touch it, see it, but how does this thing that's invisible affect me so much? Let me deal with that. But let me also deal with the fact that I'm saying a virus can make me feel like no one is ever going to love me. It's gonna make me feel all these ways. Let me unpack all the stuff I've probably been avoiding, ignoring, burying all this time. And so my diagnosis put me in a position to where I had to heal from everything, not just my herpes diagnosis, and putting that into perspective and just allowing myself to say, this is the embarkment on my figuring out who I am, my reawakening. That allowed me to look at my diagnosis differently and not just hate it, but actually begin to appreciate it and understand it. So I wanted to share that.
I think that's beautiful. And I tell you, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. The first journey is the inner battle with yourself, and forgiving yourself, and then slowly building that confidence back and taking it in whatever way works for you, whether it's a public platform or coming out and saying things about it so that we can start a conversation. And then there's the pay it forward that you guys are doing by continuing the conversation, continuing the education for people who don't know. And Hollywood, please stop making herpes the butt of jokes. I mean, it's so lazy. And I really hope that some of that can stop, because you wouldn't see people in Hollywood making fun of other groups, but they still do the herpes jokes all the time. So I hope that ends. And I just really aspire to the day when, saying you have herpes is about the same as saying you're allergic to pollen or something like that. It's just a fact about you, and it's not a big deal. But I know we're getting close to time, so I wanted to thank all of you for being here. It's been such an interesting conversation. I hope it's the first of many. And I really, Joel, thank you for what you said, the initial comments you made after the fight. You really did start something. Congratulations for accomplishing your goal, but you did much more than that. And I think you've given a lot to this group, and you've given the opportunity for all of us to talk to you. And I think this has been a really productive conversation. So Christopher, Susanna, Amber, Joel, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it.
You guys are awesome. You guys are
All
awesome.
right. You guys have a great night.